What if I told you that your brain could start dying in less than 5 minutes without you even realizing it? Most of us go through life thinking strokes are something that happen to other people, usually the elderly, usually with plenty of warning signs. But the truth is far more terrifying. A stroke can strike suddenly, without mercy, and in just a few minutes, parts of your brain may never recover. Imagine laughing with a friend, lifting your coffee cup, speaking mid-sentence. Then suddenly your smile twists, your arm drops, your words melt into gibberish. That's not science fiction. That's reality. And it can happen faster than anyone is prepared for. Welcome to the Wellness Way. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain on what really happens inside your brain during a stroke, why every second counts, and how new breakthroughs in medicine are changing the fight against this silent killer. So buckle up. This isn't just another health lecture, it's a wake-up call. And if you want more insights like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Together, we'll keep exploring the hidden battles inside the human body. When people think about life-threatening medical emergencies, they often imagine dramatic scenes, car crashes, heart attacks, or sudden collapses in the middle of a crowd. What very few of us picture is the quiet, invisible destruction of a stroke. And yet, a stroke can be far more devastating than many realize. The shocking part, your brain, the very thing that controls your memories, your movements, your words, and even your sense of self, can start dying in just 4 to 6 minutes if blood flow is cut off. 4 minutes. That's the time it takes to boil water for tea, to scroll mindlessly through your phone, or to walk the dog around the block. That's how little time your brain has before parts of it may be gone forever. For years, I used to think strokes were something distant, a condition reserved for old age or people who had already lived long, unhealthy lives. I thought there would be signs, maybe days or weeks of headaches or dizziness, something that would give you a clear warning. But the truth is much harsher. Strokes often strike suddenly, with no warning at all, and they don't discriminate the way we like to imagine. They can hit a retired grandparent, a stressed-out middle-aged parent, or even someone in their 30s who believes they're too young to worry. So what exactly is happening during those terrifying minutes? Let's start with the basics. A stroke is essentially a problem of blood flow. Your brain, although it makes up only about 2% of your body weight, consumes about 20% of your body's oxygen and energy. Every second, billions of neurons are firing, communicating, and keeping you alive and conscious. They rely on a constant, uninterrupted supply of blood, carrying oxygen and glucose. When that supply is disrupted, the brain doesn't have reserves to fall back on. It's not like a battery that can keep running for a while. The damage begins almost immediately. There are 2 main kinds of strokes. The first, and by far the most common, is called an ischemic stroke. This happens when a blood vessel in the brain gets blocked, most often by a clot. Think of a major highway in a big city. Traffic usually flows smoothly, cars entering and exiting ramps, people getting where they need to go. Now imagine a massive accident blocking multiple lanes. Cars pile up, traffic halts, and nothing moves past that point. That's exactly what happens in the brain when a clot forms. Blood can't get through, oxygen doesn't reach the tissue beyond the blockage, and brain cells in that area begin to die. The second type, hemorrhagic stroke, is less common but usually more severe. In this case, instead of being blocked, a blood vessel bursts, spilling blood into the brain tissue. Not only does this cut off oxygen to the affected area, but the bleeding itself puts pressure on the surrounding brain, crushing delicate neurons. This kind of stroke can be caused by high blood pressure, an aneurysm, or even trauma. And because it's harder to control bleeding than to remove a blockage, hemorrhagic strokes often have worse outcomes. But here's where things get both fascinating and horrifying. During an ischemic stroke, not all the brain tissue dies instantly. In the very center of the blockage, the core cells die within minutes. That area is gone, no matter what doctors do. But surrounding the core is a region called the penumbra. In this zone, blood flow is reduced but not completely gone. The cells here are struggling, hanging on by a thread. They can't function properly, but they're not dead yet. If doctors can restore blood flow quickly enough, many of these cells can be saved. If not, the penumbra gradually joins the core and the damage spreads. When I first learned about the penumbra, it hit me just how much of a race against time a stroke really is. Every minute counts. The difference between getting to a hospital in 2 hours versus 6 hours can mean the difference between walking out of the hospital or spending the rest of your life in a wheelchair. It's not just about survival, it's about the quality of life you'll have afterward. What makes this even scarier is how strokes show themselves in real life. They don't come with flashing lights or warning sirens. They come with subtle, sometimes almost comical symptoms, until you realize what they mean. A smile that suddenly looks crooked, an arm that won't stay lifted, a sentence that comes out garbled or slurred. That's why doctors teach the acronym FAST. Face, arms, speech, time. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911. It's simple, easy to remember, and it saves lives. I remember practicing this on myself after learning it. Smiling in the mirror, lifting my arms, speaking a few words just to imagine what it would feel like. It seemed silly, but it drove the point home. If I ever saw someone struggling with these signs, I wouldn't waste a second, because seconds matter. Another thing I didn't realize until diving deeper into the science of strokes is how everyday choices play into our risk. High blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, lack of exercise, poor diet, all of these chip away at our arteries. They create plaque, narrow the vessels, and make it easier for clots to form. In a way, every cheeseburger, every cigarette, every night of skipped sleep is like adding rust to the pipes that feed our brain. You may not notice it today or tomorrow, but over time the build-up creates the perfect storm for a stroke. And yet, there's hope in that knowledge, because if lifestyle plays such a huge role, it also means lifestyle changes can dramatically cut the risk. Lower your blood pressure, keep your blood sugar under control, eat foods that support heart health. Exercise not just for weight loss or appearance, but to keep your arteries flexible and strong. Quit smoking. These aren't empty slogans, they're tangible ways to protect your brain, your identity, and your independence. When I think about strokes now, I don't just think about death. I think about survival, and what kind of survival it will be. Because many people do survive strokes. But survival can mean living with partial paralysis, losing the ability to speak, or struggling to recognize loved ones. It can mean years of rehabilitation, frustration, and dependence. That reality has made me reevaluate what prevention really means. It's not just about living longer. It's about living fully, without the shadow of a sudden, devastating event taking away everything that makes life feel like life. So the next time you hear someone dismiss strokes as an old person's problem, remember the truth. Strokes are fast, brutal, and often silent until it's too late. The only real defense we have is awareness, knowing the signs, acting immediately, and making the small daily choices that add up to resilience. I know for me, every time I take a walk, choose a healthier meal, or remind myself to check my blood pressure, I'm not just taking care of my heart, I'm protecting my brain, my memories, and my future self. When I first heard about the concept of the penumbra in stroke medicine, it shook me. I had always imagined strokes as a kind of light switch. One moment the brain works, the next moment it doesn't. But the reality is much more complex and honestly far more haunting. In the middle of a stroke there is this grey zone, the penumbra. It's a region of brain tissue that isn't dead yet, but it's dying. It's like a flickering candle in the wind. If help arrives quickly enough, the flame can stabilize and burn bright again. If not, it fades into darkness, joining the dead core of the stroke. That image of a fragile, dying brain region made me think about how fragile life really is. Our brains are miraculous, but they're also terrifyingly vulnerable. Billions of neurons are depending on arteries thinner than a straw to keep them alive. When one of those arteries gets blocked, a whole part of who we are is suddenly at risk. The penumbra also reframed the way I look at time. Every second during a stroke is like a bargaining chip. Doctors often talk about the golden window for treatment, about 3 to 4.5 hours for clot-busting drugs, and up to 24 hours for advanced procedures like a thrombectomy. But here's the catch. Those numbers aren't guarantees. The longer it takes, the more of the penumbra slips away. I think about this whenever I catch myself procrastinating or wasting time on trivial things. Because in a stroke, wasted time is literally wasted brain. One of the most powerful lessons from studying strokes is that not all damage is inevitable. We've been conditioned to think that once brain cells die, that's it, no going back. But medical science is teaching us that there are windows of opportunity, moments where action can mean the difference between a lifetime of disability and walking out of the hospital almost unchanged. That's both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it means strokes aren't always a death sentence. Terrifying because it means the responsibility to act quickly often falls on the people around you. I can't help but imagine being in that situation myself, watching someone I love suddenly struggle to speak or lift an arm. Would I freeze? Would I hesitate, second-guessing myself, wondering if it was serious enough to call 911? Or would I remember the acronym FAST and make the call immediately? That's a question I hope I never have to answer, but the thought alone has made me commit the signs to memory. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call. But here's something we don't talk about enough. Strokes aren't just about the moment they happen. They're about what led up to them. And more often than not, the path begins years before, silently. High blood pressure slowly weakens the walls of arteries. Plaque builds up, narrowing the channels. The heart slips into an irregular rhythm like atrial fibrillation, allowing clots to form. These conditions don't make headlines in daily life. They don't demand attention the way chest pain or fainting might, but they are quietly setting the stage for catastrophe. This is the part that hit me the hardest, because when you really think about it, strokes are not just accidents of fate. They are often the culmination of choices, habits, and ignored warning signs. Too much salt, not enough exercise, another cigarette, another skipped doctor's visit. It all adds up. I started to see my own habits in this light, and it was uncomfortable. How many times had I shrugged off my blood pressure being a little high? How many times had I thought, I'll start eating better next week? Each one of those moments felt suddenly heavier, like pebbles that could eventually cause an avalanche. The paradox here is that strokes are both unpredictable and predictable. You can't know the exact moment one will strike, but you can predict the risk building over time. That's the tension that makes prevention so difficult. We humans are wired to respond to immediate threats, not slow, creeping ones. But stroke prevention is about being proactive before the danger becomes visible. It's about making invisible choices that protect an invisible organ. And yet, the science of strokes isn't all doom and gloom. What amazes me most is how far treatment has come. A few decades ago, the idea of reversing a stroke seemed impossible. Now, with clot-dissolving drugs and advanced surgical techniques, doctors can literally thread tiny devices through the arteries to pull out a clot. It's like plumbing for the most delicate, complex system in existence. The fact that we can do that, and sometimes restore someone's ability to speak, walk, or think, feels nothing short of miraculous. There's also the promise of technology on the horizon. I recently read about a woman who had been unable to speak for nearly 2 decades after a stroke. With the help of a brain-computer implant, she was able to communicate again. Imagine that. A piece of technology bridging the gap between damaged neurons and spoken words. It sounds like science fiction, but it's real, and it's happening now. That story gave me chills. It reminded me that while strokes are devastating, human ingenuity is relentless. But even as I marvel at these breakthroughs, I remind myself not to rely on them as an excuse. Hope for the future doesn't erase the responsibility of the present. Technology might give us better treatments tomorrow, but prevention and awareness are what save lives today. That means knowing the signs, spreading the word, and making those unglamorous lifestyle choices. Checking blood pressure, eating better, moving more, saying no to cigarettes. The penumbra taught me something profound. Life often exists in the in-between. Not dead, not alive, but waiting. Waiting for action, for intervention, for a choice to be made. And I think that metaphor stretches beyond medicine. How often do we find ourselves in our own penumbras, moments where things could go either way, depending on how quickly or decisively we act? Whether it's health, relationships, or opportunities, there's always that grey zone where the outcome isn't fixed yet. And the question becomes, will we act in time? So when I think about strokes now, I don't just think about neurons and arteries. I think about choices and urgency. I think about how fragile and precious the brain is and how much power we actually have to protect it. And I think about the penumbra, not just as a medical concept, but as a reminder that so much of life depends on how we use the time we're given. The image that sticks with me most when I think about strokes isn't the scans, the diagrams, or the medical jargon. It's a simple, everyday moment turned upside down. Picture someone sitting across from you, smiling mid-conversation. In an instant, their smile twists into something unrecognizable. Their hand slips from the table, their coffee spills, and the words they were speaking dissolve into broken syllables. What just happened? For them, a highway in their brain has been shut down. For you, it's the beginning of a nightmare. That's the terrifying thing about strokes. They steal normal life in the blink of an eye. No warning, no preparation, no chance to get ready. One moment you're living, the next, you're fighting to hold on to everything that makes you you. I find the metaphor of a traffic jam in the brain hauntingly accurate. The brain's arteries are like highways, delivering oxygen and nutrients with precision. When a clot forms, whether from plaque breaking off in an artery or a piece of debris travelling from the heart, It's as if a massive accident blocks the road. Traffic backs up. The cars stuck behind the wreck have no way to move forward. And just like cars overheating on the freeway, brain cells trapped beyond the clot start to shut down. Inside the brain, the damage is merciless. The core region of the stroke dies within minutes. Neurons there don't just shut off, they're gone forever. Surrounding that dead zone is the penumbra, where cells are still gasping for life. Doctors see this region as their battlefield. Save the penumbra and you save parts of the brain that control speech, movement, memory. Lose it, and the consequences can last a lifetime. The symptoms reflect the battlefield. If the middle cerebral artery is blocked, the most common site, you'll often see paralysis or weakness on one side of the body, difficulty speaking, and loss of sensation. If another artery is blocked, the signs can differ. Vision problems, sudden confusion, loss of coordination. Skilled doctors can sometimes guess which artery is blocked just by observing the symptoms, even before the scans confirm it. That's how closely the brain's map is tied to our human abilities. And yet, despite all the science, what strikes me most is how ordinary it looks from the outside. A drooping smile, a drifting arm, slurred speech. These seem like small things you could dismiss as fatigue or clumsiness. But hidden beneath them is catastrophe. That realization made me think about how many strokes are missed, how many people delay calling for help because they're not sure. And that delay costs lives. This is why the FAST acronym matters so much. Face, arms, speech, time. It's simple, almost childlike in its clarity. Ask someone to smile. Ask them to lift their arms. Ask them to repeat a phrase. If something looks wrong, don't wait. Call 911. Every second matters. I think about this often because if I were the one having a stroke, I'd be relying on someone else to recognize it. My own brain wouldn't be able to call for help. That's a chilling thought, that survival often depends not on yourself, but on the awareness of others. Once the stroke is recognized, the race intensifies. Treatments for ischemic strokes focus on restoring blood flow. The clot-busting drug TPA can dissolve the blockage, but only if given within a narrow window, ideally 3 to 4.5 hours after symptoms start. Miss that window, and the drug can do more harm than good. For larger clots, there's thrombectomy, a procedure where doctors thread a catheter through the arteries, sometimes starting at the groin, all the way up into the brain to physically pull out the clot. It sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's very real, and it can work up to 24 hours after the stroke began. Hemorrhagic strokes are another story altogether. When a blood vessel bursts, blood leaks into the brain or the tissues around it. The pressure damages everything in its path. These strokes are harder to treat, often requiring surgery to stop the bleeding and relieve pressure. They're less common but more deadly, which is why controlling high blood pressure is so crucial. Hearing about these treatments gave me hope, but also a sense of urgency. Yes, medicine has incredible tools, but they only matter if the patient gets to the hospital quickly. Too often people wait, hoping symptoms will pass, or worse, they go to sleep, thinking they'll feel better in the morning. By then, the penumbra may be gone. By then, the damage is permanent. And then there's prevention, which may not sound exciting, but is arguably the most powerful weapon we have. The truth is, many strokes could be prevented if risk factors were controlled. High blood pressure is the biggest culprit. Aiming for numbers below 120/80 isn't just an arbitrary goal. It's a shield against the single most dangerous condition for strokes. Add in a healthy diet, regular exercise, quitting smoking, and controlling blood sugar, and you significantly lower your chances. These aren't glamorous solutions, but they are life-saving ones. I've started looking at my own habits through this lens. Do I get enough movement each day to keep my arteries flexible? Do I choose foods that reduce plaque instead of adding to it? Do I manage stress, which can silently push my blood pressure up? It's not about living in fear, it's about stacking the odds in my favor. Because the alternative, ignoring these choices, means leaving my brain at the mercy of chance. What fascinates me most is how prevention and treatment come together in the bigger picture. Medicine can intervene in miraculous ways when a stroke strikes, but it's prevention that decides how often those interventions are needed. And when you zoom out, the story of strokes isn't just medical, it's societal. Nearly 800,000 people in the US suffer a stroke each year. Behind every number is a family changed forever, a story rewritten in an instant. When I reflect on all of this, one theme keeps echoing: fragility. The fragility of our brains, the fragility of time, the fragility of normal life. And yet, within that fragility is strength, our ability to recognize, to act, to prevent, to heal. That balance of vulnerability and resilience is what makes the story of strokes so compelling and so urgent. When I step back and think about everything I've learned about strokes, one truth keeps rising above all the details. Time is life. Every second matters. We tend to take our brains for granted, treating them as invincible command centers that will always be there when we need them. But the reality is far more fragile. A single clot, a burst vessel, a few minutes of lost oxygen, and the person we know ourselves to be can change forever. This realization has shifted how I see health. It's not just about living longer, but about living with quality, independence, and dignity. A stroke doesn't just threaten survival, it threatens identity. Losing the ability to speak, to walk, to remember loved ones, those are losses that cut deeper than numbers on a chart. That's why awareness and prevention are not optional luxuries. They are essential acts of self-preservation. On a personal level, I've started to think of health choices less as sacrifices and more as investments. Taking a walk isn't just exercise, it's insurance for my brain. Choosing healthier meals isn't just about cholesterol numbers, it's about keeping my neurons firing years from now. Even something as simple as checking my blood pressure regularly feels like an act of respect for my future self. These aren't small decisions, they're life-shaping ones. But beyond prevention, what inspires me is how human resilience shows up in the aftermath of strokes. Survivors relearning how to speak, to write, to move. It's a reminder that the human spirit doesn't surrender easily. Science and medicine are pushing boundaries too, from clot removal technologies to brain-computer interfaces that give voices back to those who lost them. These advances give me hope that even when disaster strikes, there are paths toward recovery. Still, I think the most powerful lesson strokes teach us is urgency. Not just medical urgency, but life urgency. Too often we wait for the right moment, for symptoms to get worse, for someone else to decide. But in a stroke, waiting is the enemy. And maybe in life too, hesitation can cost us opportunities, relationships, even dreams. Acting quickly, with clarity and courage, isn't just good advice in medicine, it's good advice in everything. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you had only minutes to act, whether in health, in life, or in a decision you've been postponing, would you move or would you wait? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments below so we can learn from each other's experiences. And if this conversation resonated with you, please consider subscribing to The Wellness Way. Your support helps us continue creating content that educates, empowers, and maybe even saves lives.